Beyond the headlines. This is World Insight.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. A massive migrant rush to Spain's North African territory, Ceuta, has rattled the European Union, exposing sharp divisions within the EU over border and migration policy. In response, EU interior ministers met in a video conference recently to deliberate on the emergency. Following the meeting, the EU pledged emergency financial and operational support for Spain, deploying Frontex personnel to strengthen border management while acknowledging deep-seated disagreements among member states on border sharing. Meanwhile, the United Nations has been closely monitoring the humanitarian fallout of the event as the High Commissioner for Refugee, UNHCR, called for the protection of vulnerable people amid the border turmoil. So what are the migrant crisis root causes? What does it take to deal with the aftermath now? So to answer those questions, let's loop in our panelists. More on the Ceuta migrant crisis, we have in Brussels Carol Lanu, who is the CEO of the Center for European Policy Studies. In Rome, Ivan Cardillo, senior expert at the Center for International and Strategic Studies at Louis University in Italy. And last but not least, in Beijing studio, He Wenping, professor and senior research fellow from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. Now, as to the root causes behind the Ceuta chaos, what do you think is the fundamental problem there? To you, Mr. Lanu, first.
Until today, we don't know what is the cause of this massive inflow. It's the most massive flow of migrants on a single day, as far as I remember, and that's what I read in the media. But what caused this, we don't know. Of course, people say it's the mouth-to-mouth, it's social media, but I assume there is something more behind, and there is some kind of a challenging of the EU behind, let's say, kind of a conspiracy against the EU, like we've seen on the eastern borders of the EU. For example, Belarus, which is supported by Russia, has weaponized migrants, let's say, to try to kind of invade Poland. And that happens several times over the last years. Poland has then built a large border. I think something similar has now happened. They were looking for a weak spot. That weak spot was Ceuta, just to undermine the EU and to sow divisions in the EU. And we've seen, for example, a country like Russia has been trying to do this since a long time.
Mr. Cardillo, your thoughts. What might be the root causes, the most important reasons behind the biggest scale chaos we have seen in recent years?
So if we look at it from the perspective of African people from Morocco, so basically it was the misunderstanding of a Spanish regulation, and they thought that they would get easily a citizenship or asylum in Europe. Ceuta, this happened in Ceuta because that's the only place where Europe, the rich Europe, share borders with the so-called poor Africa in terms of, developing countries. And so that's the critical point. And also it's, the critical point of tensions between two different worlds, and also the idea of using migration as a leverage for negotiating other deals, like what happened in 2021 when the same Spanish government supported Morocco within certain African disputes over the Sahara region. So I think that here we are looking at a far more complex situation, and I don't discuss it now. Maybe later we have the opportunity also to see what happened within Europe as well. So this is a Ceuta affair. It tells us a lot about Africa, about Europe, and challenges in geopolitics.
Professor He, your thoughts?
Well, there are a number of reasons behind this issue. I think if we look about the very, very deep one, that should be this unbalanced development between the global north and the global south. Otherwise, you cannot imagine why all those migrant people all rush to the European from Africa rather than another way around. So, and then second level are those reasons, of course, just like my colleagues mentioned, some misinformation has been shared, and then saying now if you get into the Spain and then you get some ID, you can be, take your residence there. And then another, I think, reason behind that's because now we have seen a lot of conflicts going on, not only between Spain and Morocco, and also to a big picture, like all those straits issues, Hormuz Strait, and then the Red Sea that way, and Suez Canal, and also this kind of strait also linking European and North Africa as a whole. This all relates to strategic. This waterway in the world relates a very big picture. Even go around with this Iran war and then all those conflicts going on.
Right. Well, there are so many different things underlining, I guess, in this issue. It's like an onion. Let's peel one layer and then another layer. Let's start from the obvious ones, the apparent reasons. First of all, the dispute between Spain and Morocco as to who is responsible for holding those massive migration back. Now, Mr. Lanoux, how do you see that discussion being going on, especially the attitude among the European countries?
Of course, you have the purely bilateral relation between Spain and Morocco, and then you have the overall relationship between the EU, because migration is governed by EU rules, and then the rest of the world, in that case also Morocco. Of course, we have read in the media over the last days there have been some tensions on certain issues between Spain and Morocco specifically, also because the Spanish Prime Minister visited Algeria recently. Algeria and Morocco are basically enemies, have disputes about the border. And some people have said, look, that's what Morocco wanted to exploit against Spain. That's one of the many hypotheses which have been made. On the other hand, let's say the EU wants to have a good relation with Morocco. Morocco is a bordering country. There are plenty of Moroccans living in the EU, I think something like 3 to 4 million at least. So that's why they want to keep the situation quiet. But for me, this is not a reason to, to leave this, untouched. I mean, there have been far too many deaths because of this attempt, to cross the border. Right. I mean, the latest figure which I read was 144. So us authorities, and if we stand for European values, we have to do something about this and basically try to see what is the reasons. And if there is a kind of a conspiracy behind, we have to make sure that those which are guilty are brought before justice.
We have not seen yet from any party showing exactly what they believe as the evidence to the exact reason that they claim why this happened. So we are looking forward to hopefully more investigative reporting as well as more intelligence sharing to the public about all of this. Having said that, though, to you, Mr. Cardillo, we see very different attitudes coming from European capitals, especially Italy, where you are. For example, among all the EU countries, Italy stood out by suspending the Schengen free movement with Spain. Now, other 22 countries within the EU have been putting out joint statements suggesting they are against the sudden, irregular migration. Now, these words are very interesting. Of course, they are used for reasons. Mr. Cardillo, tell me about your thoughts as to what this shows about the vulnerability of the migration policy and coordination among the EU capitals.
Yes, this is exactly the strongest contradiction that we are facing. Because on one side, migration belongs to the European Union as competence, and starting from June 2026, we have the impact on migrant asylum. So basically, we have the so-called European solidarity when it comes to deal with migration. But then on the other side, the political burden of dealing with migrants is shared by member states. And member states need to deal with public opinion. And that's why we see the contradiction. So on one side, we have political parties. I mean, also the Italian reaction is better understood if we look from the perspective of internal policies and public opinion. We are facing in Europe a situation where politics is more and more polarized. So we don't have any more moderate forces. And when it comes to polarized forces, political forces, the hot topics are security, and it mostly is translated into fight against illegal immigrants. Mm-hmm. And that is the way they try to deal with security, labor, jobs, and all social issues that are affecting countries. Sanchez, on this perspective, is from different political parties, is having a different approach when it comes to international politics. And this is also, is sitting in a very different position, not pretty aligned with the other member states. And this Ceuta affair, was an occasion to fire and lighten up some tensions that have been sitting there for a long time.
Right. If you look at the Ceuta, this place, it is a very small place. It's only 18 square kilometers. Its population is only 84,000 people regularly. And this time, the irregular migration, if I could quote the terminology being used by the EU, has already exceeded more than 2/3 of the overall population in that specific place. So one could imagine this huge influx of people, and why at this moment many would put a question mark over there. Professor He, I particularly noticed that you are talking about an important layer of this onion, the strategic one. We have seen issues at the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, Panama Canal, North Pole, Greenland, and the list could go on. And of course, the Strait of Gibraltar is well known for being an important route of transport. Now, we don't have any evidence to showcase any specific reason at this moment, but certainly when you have this string of geographical locations lined up and now seeing all of a sudden an irregular migration chaos going on right there in the strait, it really leads us to some imagination. Without suggesting any evidence though, tell me more about how important it is, Professor, to make sure this place, the Strait of Gibraltar, will be a place of stability. What does that mean for everybody?
Well, if you put all those segments together, and then you will see the picture really, just challenging all of us. For example, you will see during the big, this circumstances, that is Iran war, and then we see that Spain stands out. It's the only one among the European country saying, no, this is not fair and also justice war. So, the Prime Minister of Spain, he even stands very, highly and then against this war. So that is why people are saying,
voice his opinions very clearly against Israel.
Yeah, that's right. That's why even now we heard some voice saying, the Israel side and the United States side saying, okay, you see, you got a lot of trouble. Even the Spain, your policy also wrong. Like all those so-called Supreme Court, this judgment, that paper gave a loophole for all those social media information, exaggerate that. But anyway, this all the targets to the Prime Minister of Spain, saying now you are doing totally wrong, your migration policy. So it's a time to step down. So you see, this is bring up the Spain political, domestic political issue.
Bring more vulnerability
also
to the governance in Spain, and also as a result lead to some other issues. Of course, when we say this, we're looking at the bigger picture, strategic ones. And now, Mr. Lanoux, to you, how do you see the more strategic issues, not necessarily just about the incident itself, but rather about this region? Mr. Lanoux.
Of course, we know that migration to the EU has been a problem since a long time. We had the migration crisis about 10 years ago in 2015 when it came at its height. Let's say when you had the war in Syria, and there were plenty of refugees going to come through to Europe, through Turkey, Greece, and then going to Northern Europe, mostly to Germany. We have seen problems in the region around Sicily and Lampedusa, the islands between Africa and Sicily. We have seen this also at many occasions over the past. And we know Ceuta. Basically, you see groups of people, which are looking for weak spots. The weak spots, probably the ones in Turkey and the ones in Italy, have been dealt with probably for the moment. And they're looking for the next weak spot, which is at the moment Ceuta. And there has been some messages which were spread that apparently the border was open, which led to this massive invasion, in Ceuta last Friday. Strategically, it is simply because, we have Europe, a very well-governed set of countries, and then Africa, which is, as compared to Europe, lives in extreme poverty. Take only a country like Algeria, which is a close ally of China, by the way, where, I mean, overall, let's say, many people would like to leave the country as soon as they can. That is related, let's say, to overall, I mean, movements of people, let's say, which would like to come to live to Europe, let's say, because, yeah, Europe, there is stability, there is economic growth, there are possibilities for development, which many of them don't have in their own countries. And I think we see this in many countries around the world. We see this also between Latin America or South America and the United States. We see it also in countries in Southeast Asia. Look what happened with Burma and massive influx from people from Burma towards Thailand and so on. It is always a right of people, let's say, to look for better well-being. And of course, then they can move. And that is enshrined in international law.
My question to you, rather, is the strategic stability in the Strait of Gibraltar, which, of course, the Ceuta issue very much make people, more aware of at this moment. What do you make of that, Mr. Lanoux, if you could, directly to this question?
Yeah, again, let's say, but it is the issue, the strategic stability issue. If there is huge discrepancies in the world between economic wealth, between economic development, between capacity to develop yourself, between regions, then it's extremely difficult to prevent people, let's say, from going from one region to another.
Right.
So strategically, we can try to control our borders, but there will always be, and there has always been over the last 2,000, 2,500 years in world history, migration flows from one region to
all right, you don't have to repeat yourself. I got your point. My question, though, I'm sure, Mr. Cardillo, if you want to address it directly, the strategic stability of the region, especially surrounding the Strait of Gibraltar, is crucial, as we all know. And now we have got three countries, Spain, Morocco, the UK, that has a role there. But the latest chaos of irregular migration certainly has brought more concern to the region. What do you make of the strategic stability of this region? How do you think this issue should be properly handled to make sure the stability could be maintained?
Gibraltar is crucial for logistics and oil and all transportation inside the Mediterranean Sea. So that's vital to keep it open and safe. I don't think that we will see something that happened in Hormuz because Morocco doesn't have that strength to pull and close that piece of sea. On the other side, Morocco is having a dispute with Algeria, and there Italy is supporting Algeria on that side. So there is something within the continent in Africa that, it's a conflict, many interests and conflicts of interest that are happening, and Europe has to play a role there because, again, the energy crisis is pulling more and more European countries to rely on African resources. So they cannot buy anymore from Russia, they need more Africa. Africa knows this power and wants to, leverage on that to have a better condition. Turkey, for example, is not part of the European Union, but is receiving money and funds from the European Union to keep under control the migration that was passing through Turkey. Maybe the same things wants Morocco, to receive more funds to keep the region under control. What was tried in the past, so to be proactive and try to stabilize regions like Egypt, Libya, and try to have some development plans to, give a better living condition to local people so that they don't risk their lives towards a certain future on the side of the sea if they manage to survive of the trip. So saying that European countries needs to play a more active role there in Africa, try to be more sustainable in terms of policies. Mm-hmm. Let's remember that Ceuta is also perceived as a Spanish colonial heritage inside the Morocco region. So again, we also have this colonial, meaning of certain European postures. So I think that Ceuta might be the opportunity for Europe to work again on internal integrity, support the countries that are on the first line of borders, like Europe, like Spain, Greece, and Italy, and have a unified approach.
And that's exactly the complexity there, because as we said, it's just like an onion. There is one layer after another of complexity. There was the so-called colonial past and the relationship between the earlier colony and those who made the colonies. And secondly, there is the North and the South issue, especially for developing countries, how to revive the economy, what roles others could play to support. Meanwhile, there's also internal economic, political policies within countries as to how they can bring up their economies and make sure they have jobs for everybody. And at the same time, there's a strategic stability issue in some crucial water areas around the world in which there might be much bigger geopolitical powers playing over there. So, Professor He, I have to come back to you also on these very complex webs of factors likely to be related to what is going on right now.
Yes, when we talk about the strategic stability, I think for European country, it's not saying close that strait. Actually, as we just heard from Professor there from Italy, it's no means for Morocco saying, oh, set some block checkpoint all the way like Iran or US has been doing now in the Strait of Hormuz. But for European country, the biggest threat for them, for their stability, is the migrant issue. You see, this migration issue can influence the European domestic politics issue. Left-wing, party is on, and the right-wing party is on. So who is on, who is down? So matters very much with this migrant issue.
It is a very sensitive strain
yes,
of the
so
European
that is why
issues.
Even Morocco this time around, some information saying they are using this as a weapon. Now trying
but we don't have any evidence for that either.
Yes,
there are
this
so
is
many
some
different
analysis
opinions.
has been mentioned. So you see, this is a triangle relationship between Spain and Morocco and Argentina.
And not limited to that, by the way. As
this is another
illustrated.
strategic stability. You see how to keep all those balance about those countries' diplomatic issue.
We
and
have
European
noticed
stability
since the recent administration in the U.S., for example, there has been different policy changes toward toward African countries. And we see some back and forth among different administrations. Very interestingly, that we see more focus on Africa from different perspectives. So how do you see Europe, if I could ask you, Mr. Cardillo, could play a better role to reduce the vulnerability from Europeans' perspective, whether it's about migration or it's about strategic stability for transportation, for raw materials, including oil and etc. over there? What kinds of interaction the European capitals need to have, not only with the African neighbors and among themselves, but also with other global powers, it seems, who want to have a say there?
Europe, in order to be able to do this, Europe has to have a clear agenda and clear tools to enforce it. So have a clear plan and have also resources and action of power, their ability to act and realize it. And this is the main problem, because usually Europe sometimes have very beautiful, wonderful ideas, but then they have no tools, no resources, because then member states jump in and they have their own political agenda. But what Europe can do, it's really a lot, because Europe has borders with Africa. We know Ceuta being one of that. The Mediterranean Sea is just a common sea, which is like a few hours of navigation away from Africa. And Europe has to try to, on one side, embrace the cultural heritage and also, deal with something from the past, which is not beautiful and acceptable from the African perspective. But still, a lot of African elites get educated in Europe, for an example. And also, in Rome here we have central, institutions, United Nations. So the idea is that they can build a dialogue and try to have a unified action plan that can boost the Europe posture in respect to Africa, but also in Palestine.
Sure, Mr. Lanoux, if you want.
If I can add something on this, Europe is what they call has a lot of programs to externalize, as they call it, border controls, and has, for example, programs with countries like Tunisia, with Morocco, but also, for example, with Turkey, to make sure that what they cannot control, they ask others to control. And for example, in the case of Morocco over the last years has received something like 2.1 billion euros to help to monitor the border. But of course, if you give this to a third country, then the problem is sometimes, how is the money spent, and how can you control as a European Union whether the money is effectively spent on border controls? But there are effective programs which exist to do this, and which certainly have worked well, like in the case of Turkey.
Well, I guess one other crucial question, which has always been there, very important, is the humanitarian crisis. Lives matter, as we all know. This is very crucial. So at this point, what can be the best way to deal with this crisis, the humanitarian crisis? Very briefly from you, Mr. Cadillo. We have only 30 seconds left.
I believe that gates should be open. I don't believe in strong borders and stronger, closing the gates to foreign people. I believe, demographic speaking, it's a boost. Some labor forces are missing, and immigrants can be that. Of course, they should be, identified. They need to have, the exact background. But I'm a strong believer that open borders,
Thank you very much.
The best option.
We're running out of time. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. Thanks for being with me. Bye for now.